Hello, everyone. This is Sean, and this week we're going to be talking about networking. Now, there's a lot to talk about with networking, and I'm going to go into a variety of depths, levels of detail as we go along. So let's just get going. Let's just get started. First, we want to get to the Network and Sharing Center. The Network and Sharing Center is a control panel that we're going to use to get some basic and more advanced information. So down here in the Windows menu, if we go to Control Panel, in Control Panel, go to Network and Internet, and then in here, Network and Sharing Center. In here, you're going to see a little bit of information, and we'll get into the advanced topics in just a second. So this is our current active network. If we had more ways to connect to the internet, we would have more active, possibly more active networks. So right now, we have a single private network. I'm connected to my local network, and I'm connected via Ethernet. I am plugged in. I have a cable connected to the computer. Obviously, there are other ways you can connect to the internet. You can connect via a wireless connection, Wi-Fi, to an access point. You can use Bluetooth if you have a Bluetooth modem enabled. So there are different ways and different types of connections you can use. In this case, I have Ethernet. Ethernet 0 is the first Ethernet because it's also possible that you have multiple Ethernet ports on your computer, and so you may have more than one Ethernet connection. So that said, this is our basic network. If I had other connections that I wanted to set up, such as a VPN or a dial-up connection or something like that, I could set it up here. That's beyond the scope of what we're going to deal with in this class. So this would be something that you would see more of in a Network Plus class or a Cisco class. So, all right, let's go to the advanced sharing settings and show you some of the other features that we have here. So our current private profile, that's the connection that we're in, you can see that we have network discovery turned on. Now, network discovery is for us to discover other machines on our network. So if I have a machine and then maybe in another room, my wife has another machine, I will be able to, if network discovery is turned on, I will be able to see her machine from my computer and vice versa. If I don't want anyone to see my machine or if I don't want to see anyone else's, I can turn network discovery off and then I will not see any other machine on the network if I start searching for them. File and printer sharing is pretty much what it sounds like. It allows us to share files and or printers that are on this computer to other people. We may share them with other users, and we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. We'll talk about file sharing this week. We'll talk about printer sharing when we talk about printers in a later week. Home group is a way to connect a bunch of machines without having a centralized location. Home group basically just says there's 4 or 5 machines in the house. They can all talk to each other with very basic credentials and configuration. And that's Windows' way of trying to allow us to connect small groups of machines in a home. Now, this is all the configuration for the private or my current profile. We also have a guest or public profile, which in this case, you can see network discovery is turned off, file and printer sharing is turned off. So if you were to log in as a guest, you would not have all the features that you would if you're logged in with a private account. So if we go to all networks, these are things that both private and public and guest networks will have. So such as public folder sharing. I showed you this in, I think, week 2 or 3 when we talked about the different, I'm forgetting exactly what it was called, but I had shown you how to turn on public folders. This is when we were talking about profiles, and there was a public folder, the public desktop profile, and you had to turn this on in order to access public folders. Media streaming, we won't deal with at this time. File sharing connections. When we are sharing files across other machines, across 2 other machines, we right now have 128-bit encryption to protect the file sharing. What we mean by that is that when the file is being transferred, when the bits are being transferred either across the Ethernet cable or across the Wi-Fi connection, if people were to capture that data being sent back and forth, it would be encrypted with a pretty strong key to where it would be very difficult for someone to unpack and decrypt what we were sending to see what we were sending. So it's a way to hide your data from people that may be trying to capture it. That said, and from a home user, that's not really an issue. But for businesses, this is a concern. And so that's why it's here. It's turned on by default. And password protected sharing, meaning if you want to share a folder with someone else, they need to provide a password to access it, to access whatever it is, whether it's a file or a printer or something. That's just saying you need to provide your credentials in order to use the shares. Now, let's take a look at the actual connection settings that we have. So let's go back here to the sharing center and let's check out the Ethernet connection that we have here. So if I click on that, it's going to bring up the status of the Ethernet. Notice it's set to enabled. I'm connected to the internet. We'll talk about IPv6 in a minute. And I've been connected for, well, apparently 21 minutes. And I have a gigabit speed. So if I want to check the properties and see how this is configured, go down here to properties, notice the UAC shield. If I click on this, it should be asking me, oh, it didn't. That's right, because we turned it off. Ha ha. Oh, crud. I guess I'm cutting this part out. Okay, so now let's take a look at the actual connection. Let's go back over here to the Ethernet connection and click on it. And here we see the status. You can see I am connected to the internet via IP version 4. I'm not set up for v6. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's enabled. I've been connected for about 23 minutes. I have gigabit speed. All right, so let's take a look at the properties of this connection, because there are a number of things in here that we want to talk about. So here in the Ethernet properties, this, you can see this is the actual gigabit network connection that I have. This is my Ethernet card. And then in here, I have a number of what I'm going to call groups, 3 different groups of connection types, things that use this connection. So the first group is the top 3, and I like to call these the programs, the clients. They basically are what allow Windows to work with a network. So the client for Microsoft Windows, this is what allows me to access computer resources on other machines over the network. So this is what allows me to find a shared folder or a shared printer. File and printer sharing is just the opposite. This is what allows me to share my personal files, folders, and printers to other people. So client allows me to get things from other people. File and printer sharing allows me to share things to other people. The quality of service, QoS packet scheduler, this is something that allows Windows to more efficiently use the network. This QoS is a term that how am I going to explain this? This is something that allows Windows to determine what data, what information is more important than others. So sometimes, for example, if you're on the internet and you're actively browsing the web, that stream of data should be more important than Windows checking for updates, for example. And so QoS Packet Scheduler will schedule which packets go when. So if you're actively using the internet, your data should be going faster than background services and things looking for other information. So that's what quality of service does. So these 3 things are Windows Windows applications that use the internet. So this is how we are able to use the internet with the operating system. The next group are the protocols. Now, protocols are rules. These are the sets of rules that we use to connect to other things on the internet. So we all have to follow the same rules. If we don't follow the same rules, we're not going to be able to talk to each other. So for example, IP version 4. This has been the industry standard for many, many years. It still is. This still works across the internet. And we'll talk about this more in a later video about what it is and how it works. But this is the same rules that everybody across the world uses to talk to each other. If we didn't do this, if we didn't all use the same set of rules, for example, if Australia used a different version of TCP/IP than we did, then we wouldn't be able to connect to anyone in Australia. We would try, we would be asking for different things at different times, and we wouldn't be able to talk to each other. So IPv4 is essentially the default standard at this point. IP version 6 is the new standard. I say new, it's been around for almost 20 years. But it hasn't been implemented yet, partially because we found ways to make IP version 4 work, is the short answer. IP version 6 was meant to stop us running out of addresses, because IP version 4 has a set limit of a few billion addresses. Well, we have more than a few billion devices in the world right now. So we had to come up with clever ways to reuse many addresses, which we have done, which is why IP version 4 is still around. IP version 6 exists, everything is compatible with it, and we're still using version 4. So at some day, maybe version 4 will go away and we'll only be using version 6. But for right now, this is what I'm going to teach. This is what we're going to deal with. This is what's going to be on the exam. So the other things we have, the only other thing really, is the driver. Drivers are specific software, pieces of software that talk directly to the hardware. So every piece of hardware has to have a driver that talks to Windows. It's the interface between hardware and Windows. So in this case, this is the driver that connects hardware to our Windows machine so we can actually talk to the internet, because Ethernet uses a completely different language than Windows operating system. And so there has to be something that translates that back and forth. And that's the driver. So that's the basic overview of Network and Sharing Center and the different things you can see inside here. Next video, I'm going to be talking about TCP/IP version 4 and how we actually set up addresses and talk to each other over the internet, how we're able to interact with different machines.